So today we're going to talk about the classified overtime, focusing on the general fund, looking at prior years and where we are so far fiscal year 26 year to date. And then we're also going to talk about some of the success the department's had with graduating cadets compared to the attrition and looking at the historicals. This gives you a look at fiscal year 24, fiscal year 25. I won't rehash all those numbers since they're identical to what we talked about last quarter as far as historical comparisons. But on fiscal year 26, where we are trending year to date, the budget number that you see of the $14.8 million is based on the adopted budget. Where we are actuals year to date is about $13.9 million. Generally, you can see in the prior years where we generally trend over on overtime compared to the adopted budget. There's always in the past been savings that we can identify in other line item areas like base pay and even other areas that are non-personnel items where we may have budgetary savings to help offset where overtime has trended over. So at this point in fiscal year 26, it's a little bit too early to sort of make a final projection on where that's going to be. We do know that there will be some savings in other areas in HPD to help offset where we trend over on overtime. So that's something that, again, we'll continue to monitor. We'll be back next quarter to talk about it again. But it is something that, of course, we closely monitor. And I think that maybe the chief could talk a little bit about where some of the overtime has been focused. I know that a lot of the overtime is really need-driven based on what they're seeing in the community and what the needs are. So I don't know, Chief, if you want to talk a little bit about some of the areas that the overtime has been focused on.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. The overwhelming majority of our overtime goes to operations. Second is the airport system, reimbursed by Haas. And then you get into holidays. If you look at the graph here, you'll see the spike in November and December, and that comes obviously because there's 2 holidays in November, 2 holidays in December. The mayor and this body were kind enough to give city employees 2 extra holidays this year. So when we come next quarter and the quarter after, our holiday overtime will be higher than the years before because we have 2 other holidays, and it's about $500,000 per holiday for us to staff the city with police services. So that's why you see the spikes in November and December. And then our investigative overtime is down, our special events overtime is down, and to the director's point, when you look at a little bit of the delta between the years, there's always unforeseen circumstances. For instance, the 2 weekends of cold weather, no one can predict Mother Nature. In the prior years, we've had hurricanes. Thank goodness we didn't have any this year, but our overtime budget fluctuates based on the unpredictables that go on both through Mother Nature and through current events in the country. So we've been very diligent with cutting down where we can. We are about 23% down from last year on overtime with some operational changes we made. So we're very proud of that and looking forward to continuing to be good stewards of the city's money.
Mm-hmm. So specifically looking at the blue line and the orange line, you can see that so far fiscal year 26, the classified actual overtime has trended below, as the chief mentioned. So far within the first 6 months, it's an overall reduction of about $6.8 million compared to fiscal year 25. And then, Chief, if you could talk a little bit about the recruitment and the retention compared to attrition.
Sure. As we've discussed many times publicly and in front of this body, manpower has been a constant challenge for the Houston Police Department for the last 20 years. We were fortunate enough to get a phenomenal contract, one of the best in the state, one of the best in the country. And so you can see from the slide, if you look from left 17 all the way to 25, sometimes attrition was higher than cadets. Sometimes cadets were higher than attrition, but just barely. But if you look at FY26 to date, attrition 72, 181 ads. That's actually an equal amount of ad as we've had in the previous 17 to 20 years, which is a phenomenal step for us and our goal to try to get as much manpower as we can. So we thank you guys again for your support in both the contract and also what we do every day.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Councilmember Kamen.
Thank you. Very quickly, Director Dabowski, you had mentioned, and Chief, I think you had alluded to this, there's other savings that the department is looking at to offset. What are some of those examples, if you can share those?
Mm-hmm. So in the police department specifically, there are savings in civilian base pay, civilian overtime. So those are things that we look at when you look at the police department's budget in totality, and those are just a few examples, right? There's, as you know, a lot of line items, but we look at the whole entire department budget, whether it's classified or civilian, to identify any savings that can be used to offset the needs.
And I'm sure we'll get into that as we get into budget season, but understanding some of those offsets and the impact that it's having on the department would be very helpful. Chief, it's great to see you. I know you've been very busy, as is your team, and our appreciation to everyone in service. You talked about the unpredictability, whether it's the freezes and other weather events or the number of protests, for example, that we have had in the city of Houston. I often talk about, well, some of that is predictable because it's Houston. We are seeing increased extreme weather. We have now 2 years in a row had multiple freezes where we're not necessarily getting reimbursement for those. One, what is the impact, for example, of one weekend of standing up our warming centers to HPD, the additional patrols, even with hot outreach that has to occur? What are the impacts there, and what are we doing moving forward in our budget to try to accurately project some of this? Because we don't necessarily do disaster projections when it comes to our overtime in the budget.
On a citywide basis, generally the warming centers cost about $1 million per day for all of the departments that are involved. Last year, when we had Winter Storm Enzo, you're right, that was not a federally reimbursable event. And so the costs for the freeze that we had in the previous fiscal year was absorbed within the department's existing budgets. And so as we get closer to general appropriations in April, we look at how is the department trending, where are their savings, where are they over for every department. This is not just for HPD, right? It includes health and solid waste, all of the departments. And based on that, that's where we'll see if additional budget needs to be added, and that will be presented to council in April.
Okay, so again, I think my ask is, and Chief, if you want to add to this, we have to start projecting for the expectation of disasters. Because again, what we see is we have a healthy, right, or try to keep a healthy fund balance, but we know we're going to be taking from that because of overtime, but if we know, we need to be saying so. And we know that we're going to have more freezes. We know that we're going to have more floods. We have to be prepared, not just from a public safety perspective, but from a fiscal perspective.
Sure. So what we do operationally, as our cost savings come up throughout the year, we understand that there is likely to be an event at some point. If there is not, we get toward the end of the year, great. We have a piggy bank and we can use it for whatever we need to. Some operational changes we've made, so I'll take the freeze, for instance. The more runway time you have for an event, the better you can plan, obviously. So we would try to utilize as many on-duty resources as possible. So there's a variety of ways you can handle natural disasters. The traditional way is a full mobilization, which the entire department works. Everybody goes on 12-hour shifts. That's an inordinate amount of overtime, because if you're off that day, that's a 12 hours of overtime per officer. If you're not off, it's 4 hours per day, because most of them work 8 or 10-hour shifts. So this year we implemented some contingency plans for our disasters. We have Method A and Method B officers. Method B have schedules that we can adjust anytime as operationally necessary. So we built teams of contingency plans. So if the weather did X, then we would do Y. And all the contingency plans were based on only spending the money if we had to, as opposed to spending the money in case we needed to, if that makes sense. And that made quite a bit of difference, at least for this event, in terms of amount of overtime, or the last 2 weekends, I should say.
Director, did I hear you say we are getting reimbursed for some of this most recent blast, or no?
No.
No reimbursement on this most recent? Okay, okay. Got it. Okay, got it. Thank you. Councilmember Flickinger.
How much of the overtime is driven by the CDSF funds from the council members?
I'd have to go look at the exact number, but so that's not listed in the operational number on the slide, because it's not from the general fund. So the presentation is based on what we spend.
Terrific, because I'd like to see it without it anyway, because I mean, I think that's kind of.
We can get it for you.
But the HAS, that number is in here?
It is.
Okay. I mean, I almost think it'd be good to see it without that number as well, since that number's being reimbursed, so we can get a little more.
It's incredibly low.
Yeah, okay. And then last, to Councilman Kamen's point, the protest, how much does that cost us in overtime?
It depends on the size of the protest.
What about the ones over the last year? Can you tell me how much those have cost?
I can get you the number. It also depends on the time of day. So if you have a protest that only requires maybe 1 sergeant and 6 officers, and it's during the day, it's not going to cost us anything because those officers are on duty.
Okay.
Weekends, after hours, nights, sometimes we can adjust our staffing schedule so that we can do it not on overtime, but if we have too much going on, whether they're instructing or they also have another protest during the day. So protests can run us anywhere from $100,000 a protest to 0.
Okay.
But I can pull, for general awareness, we do about 400 protests a year of variety, sizes, shapes, topics. And so it varies per protest, but I can pull the number for you.
Okay, thank you.
On the previous slide, that 14.8 was that the full year budget?
That's the full year budget.
And then the 13.8 is half the year?
The full year budget is
The full
14.9 million.
year, 14.8 was the full amount budgeted for HPD overtime, and
Correct.
13.8 is where we are.
So
half.
we've almost spent all of the budget.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Okay, I was making sure I was looking at it right.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pro Tem Peck.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief and Director, for the presentation. I'm trying to figure out with the overtime outside of the general fund, and I see the chart here that breaks it down. Is that including reimbursements that we're getting, not necessarily for disasters, but for other things like special events where maybe someone's paying for, an officer to be there? How is that factored into this number?
Right, it could be. So in the case of a disaster, typically the overtime expenditures run through the general fund. We don't typically receive reimbursement on a disaster event that is reimbursable, like, for example, Beryl or derecho, until it could even be the following fiscal year. And so while we try to true up those time cards as quickly as we can, we do have to work with our federal and state partners. So in the event of a disaster, it could certainly be that the disaster overtime is shown in here and the reimbursement may come until the following fiscal year, for example.
But for something that's not a disaster, like a special event or something where we're getting reimbursed, and it's not necessarily going back to the general fund, it's going maybe to, the special events or, some other fund, is that number reflected in here regardless of any reimbursements that we may have received?
So this is just for the general fund only. There are large-scale events in here as well. There is overtime in other special revenue funds, though, but it's outside of this.
There is. So the special revenue fund is most of the stuff that we get reimbursed for. So probably the best example of your question is the marathon. So that overtime is not listed in the operation because it's reimbursed. Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay.
So do we have that number outside of the general fund as far as what we're actually, as a department, whether it's the general fund or some other fund, what we're actually spending for overtime?
We do. I can get it for you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, good to see you. Similar to Councilmember Flickinger's question about the CDSF, I'm interested in that information as well. When we had this meeting, when did we have this first meeting? A quarter ago. And Chief Diaz had kind of intimated that council members give up to $1 million of overtime funds towards the department. And you just mentioned that this is not necessarily included in that. And he kind of verbally offered guidance about not necessarily being interested in council offices directing dollars to our command stations, and I do that throughout my budget. Does that influence the numbers, and is that still the guidance in terms of council offices directing dollars for overtime for targeted public safety issues in their district?
We welcome council member safety funds or district funds
Sure.
for safety initiatives.
Sure.
We want to make sure our captains and our executive staff have control over how each dollar is spent, in the sense that we can make an agreement or a goal of public safety initiatives, quality of life initiatives, but there are times when we are short on overtime and a captain may say, hey, I could use these council district funds for this violent crime. And we just want to make it clear we reserve the right to do that, to use those funds in the district for public safety, but maybe not for individual projects. Does that make sense?
and that's communicated. It makes sense. I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
And so for my office, we co-create that. I essentially ask the command stations, tell me what your priorities are. This is what I'm hearing on the street. That's how we co-create that together. If you need to go do what you need to go do, handle that, but also handle this.
Perfect.
Right? That's my method. But the verbal guidance that was offered, provided confusion for me. So we had paused on the funds because we were like, well, okay, is this still receptive? Is this still, when we come to the command stations to say, hey, this is what we're hearing out, super neighborhood, our civic clubs, we need some targeted attention on what's going on with the after hours. Will there be resistance to that? And so from what I'm hearing today, this is still welcomed to co-create public safety initiatives that allow for us to address our priorities while allowing our command stations to also say, hey, we have a priority too, and to use those funds.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning to you both, and thank you for the presentations. Chief, I've got a couple questions for you. So slide 3 shows that headcount as of the end of last year is up by 340 officers from FY25. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay, well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I'm curious to know, the officers that you've added onto the force, how does that translate in terms of adding officers out on patrol, patrolling our neighborhoods?
Statistically,
Yes.
so for the
you know.
first time, and as long as I can remember, and our employee allocation team can remember, all of our sergeant and patrol spots in patrol are filled. And now we are getting to the point where we can backfill some of our investigative spots, which obviously will also cut down on overtime, because for ease of numbers, if a division has 100 investigators and they've been down 80, they still have the work of 100 investigators, or I should say 100 allocated spots. And so those 80 are working overtime, significant amounts of overtime to get the work done. Now that we are getting more and more officers in the department and on the street, we can begin to backfill some of those spots, and then hopefully in the near future, start adding more spots to patrol as well.
Okay, so you haven't been able to add any additional units on any given shift yet. You've been able to fill openings that were already there.
Correct.
Okay. I noticed the fire department presentation has some numbers on response time, and I know the mayor has spoken that our response times are better. Will you be able to provide us information on what the current response times are for the various categories of calls?
Sure, I can do it.
Okay, and can you give us a broad summary of what those numbers look like, how they've improved? If they have?
They have improved. So Code 1 calls for service are immediate life safety, and they're down from just shy of 7 to under 6 minutes. And I can give you I think right now we're at about 5.89, I believe, but I'll give you the numbers for all the various codes.
Well, that's definitely great news, so glad to hear that. And curious to know also, when someone works overtime, are they paid according to what their current salary is? Or are they able to work, say, a different job description and paid at a different rate?
What assignment you work for overtime is irrelevant. Your overtime rate is your overtime rate. It's time and a half.
Okay, got it. So it's tied back to what your normal salary is?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, all right. Thank you.
On the, and congrats, I've never seen that bar chart like that. We were always seeing the opposite bar chart with attrition, so great job on recruiting. And on the patrol, we're all happy to hear that that's filled. Is that mainly with new recruits, or is that transferring people from other divisions, or how is that, a combination of both?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you know offhand in investigations what the vacancies are, or how many you're trying to fill in investigations?
I do not know the number
Okay.
offhand, but I can get it for you.
Okay. Thank you. We will move along to overtime fire.
Thank you.
Ma'am, if I could take 10 seconds of your time. So we have had Director Rhonda Smith working at the Houston Police Department for my entire time and the executive staff. And she sadly has decided to...
Do not tell me she's leaving. Do not tell me that.
Director Smith has decided to retire and enjoy herself and move on to greener pastures. And I just want to tell this body that, because I know all of you have dealt with her at some point. She is a phenomenal human being, a phenomenal CFO. My entire time in management at the Houston Police Department, she's been in that role, and I'm just a knuckle-dragging cop. And every financial question I have, she explains to me 5 and 6 times till I get it. And so I cannot tell this body and anybody watching how much we appreciate Director Smith and all she has done for us.
As someone who looks through every line item, man, she knows the answer for every single one. Mayor Pro Tem.
Chief, thank you for bringing up that Rhonda is retiring, because everyone around this horseshoe has been such a fan of her work, and she definitely knows how to make sure that the numbers are where the numbers should be, and she knows how to explain it to us so that we can understand it clearly. So Rhonda, on behalf of the entire City Council and the City of Houston, thank you very much, and we wish you the very best in your retirement, and enjoy those grandkids.